Portland Psychedelic Society and Oregon Psilocybin Society are proud to announce Paul Stamets speaking at the Newmark Theater in Portland, Oregon, September 20th. Tickets go on sale July 24th.
Like this. Okay. So I have not been working with entheogens for 25 years. That's been more recent, but I have 25 years experience working with trauma. More than that, if we want to consider my own healing from trauma experience, which was really the beginning of the whole story. Wow, this is a strange microphone. Welcome, everybody. So I want to, first of all, give some thanks to Helen and this amazing team here, Jason, who's doing the video, Michael up there, who's helped me with the organization of the slides and is pushing the buttons for me. And then we have Elizabeth. Where's Elizabeth? Where are you? All right. There's Elizabeth, who's a colleague, psychedelic psychotherapist, as well as Joe over here. So if for some reason the content tonight triggers you, you can grab them and they'll help you. I'm not kidding. This content that I'm going to give to you tonight can actually be quite triggering, so I'm quite serious about that. So what I'd like for you to do is to monitor yourself, watch your reactions, and take care of yourself. That's a big piece of what we're doing here. The other thing I want you to know is that everything that I am presenting here tonight is from my personal experience, both professionally and very much personally. So I think with that said, I've covered everything that I need to do in terms of the welcoming. I would like us to take a second. This is probably more for me than for you, but we're going to do it anyway. Take a minute and close your eyes. I want to get us all to some place of safety internally. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's the core foundational tool, as you will see, that we need to use ongoingly in order to cope with whatever trauma that we have experienced in our lives. So we'll take a few minutes to just close our eyes and notice our breath. And notice that you're here sitting on a chair in a body, and that right now you're safe. So that no matter what happens and whatever gets triggered for you tonight, you can come back to this place. Come back to your breath. Be aware of your feet touching the ground. Be aware of the sensations in your body as you sit on the chair. You can slowly open your eyes just a little tad and look around just slightly, so you can keep awareness of your body and your inner world, as well as beginning to let the outer world in. And notice if, as you open your eyes, if you get or have any awareness that shifts. It's one thing to be aware of our inner world. It's another thing to be aware of our outer world. And both places have to be tended to when we're dealing with healing with trauma. Like a crucial skill not to be taken lightly. Because trauma, as many of you know, is not a concept, it's not a head thing, it's actually a body somatic experience. So when we've been traumatized, when we're triggered, we leave our body. It's part of what it is. So the more that we can practice coming back into the body in a very safe way, then the easier it is for us to then move to the next step, connect with people, engage with ourselves, engage with our own impulses, our urges, and our instincts, which is another important theme that we're going to be talking about tonight. Okay, so, please. Great. So tonight, my mission tonight is to get you from a place of walking through the world in a traumatized, dissociated place, which is not to say that you're all there, but I'm assuming, since I'm there a lot of the time, into the place of the uniquely, divinely orchestrated true self. Divinely orchestrated true self is what we're after here. So I don't care about normalizing the ego structure. That's not what I'm about. I don't care about having us all become more functional, walking, normal human beings, whatever we think that is. Because that wasn't my story. My story was dysfunctional, crazy, and I never became normal. What I happened to become, I think Helen understands, what I happened to become was more my true self. And so our true self is what this journey is about. So that's where we're going. And I'm going to try to explain it in terms of my story. We're going to go into the intelligence of trauma as a catalyst for transformation. So trauma is a catalyst for transformation. We're going to look at what is CPTSD. I don't know how many people here need to know the definition. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we may just do that briefly. Looking at some of the stages of development. In other words, what makes PTSD different from complex PTSD? Two separate different things. Then we're going to talk about what exactly do we mean by this true self? What is a true self? And what's an impaired self? So if we're not in our true self, we're in a trauma-impaired self. And we're going to look at the healing process, accessing safety, other tools, stages of recovery, and the place that entheogens play in this whole process. So actually, what we're going to talk about tonight isn't unique to working with psychedelics, but psychedelics can enhance the journey. And so if we understand the journey, psychedelics or not, then we can actually work with the psychedelics in an informed, smart, intelligent manner that doesn't throw us out of the water and create more problems. Everybody get it? Because we can use psychedelics to dissociate ourselves further, or we can use psychedelics to help ourselves speedily recover to who we truly are. That's what we want. Who we truly are is a happy, joyful, wise person who knows what their life is about. And that's what I think we're all after, unless some of us are after just sort of floating on the stars somewhere. That's different, but that's not what we're going to talk about. Okay, so why am I up here? I talked to my ex-husband last night, and I happened to be sharing with him that, wow, I'm giving this talk, and that there were like 110 RSVPs. And he went, wow. And I said, yeah, I've been preparing for this, the past few weeks. And he came back to me and he said, no, actually, you've been preparing for this your whole life. And that's true. I'm standing up here right now. It's like I feel like I'm a star. And like all of my suffering has gotten me to this point. My suffering and my healing has gotten me to this point to where I can speak to you about this journey and this process. So just briefly, and I'll be interweaving it in and out as we go. I had an eating disorder from about the age of 11 until I was 32. It was a 20-year eating disorder. And One day I woke up, it was 17 years later, so it started at age 11. 17 years later, I woke up out of my stupor and I said, something's wrong. But up until that point, I just thought this was an ingenious way of keeping myself thin while I could eat whatever I wanted. That's what I thought was going on. And that's actually a stage in the recovery process, which we'll talk about later. But so when I woke up from out of this denial, I went, aha, something's not right here. And in my genius, I decided that my biggest goal in life was to be a normal eater. And it took me 3 years to achieve that fact. But what I didn't realize was that even though I became a normal eater, I had to deal with then some of the real stuff that was going on underneath. I was eating normally, but I was depressed, I was anxious, I couldn't keep a job. I lived in a pork factory in the Soho district of New York City. I painted the walls black. And some winters I would be inside of a plastic tent because I was too poor to have the windows fixed when the wind blew the windows out. I would put one of those little portable heaters in there, space heaters, to keep myself warm. I would wake up in the middle of the night and go binging and purging in the middle of the night, scrounging around for leftovers in garbage pails in New York City. That's how low I had gotten. So when I became a normal eater, this was like an amazing accomplishment. It did a lot for my self-esteem, but little did I know that I then had another few decades of work to get through the depression, the despair, the dread, the anxiety, and the social anxiety. I couldn't even connect with people at that time. It was impossible for me to do that. My anxiety was this high. So that's when I began the long road to recovery. And in the middle of that, on the subway in New York City, well, back up a little bit. So child of the 60s, crazy lady that I am, doing LSD all over the place, and having crazy journeys and trips. I had my last journey, Lsd Journey, in college, and I was like 20 years old. And in that journey, I saw God very clearly. That was the end. That was the end of my psychedelic experiences at that age. I didn't need anything else. I was put right in touch with the experience of God. So fast forward now to about age 25, 26, I'm sitting in the subway in New York City, coming back from a Rolfing session, and blasted through with light and love. And I looked around the subway, the graffiti, the bums, the whole world transformed into this glistening world of grandeur and light. At the same time, I was binging and purging 4 or 5 times a day. And somehow or other, I had to bridge this gap of how do I get from this place of suffering and misery into this world of light. And something in me clicked and went, I have to do this, and it has to be spiritually based. So at that time, basically what I was doing was I was making a commitment to find my true self. Because even though I was engaging in those awful behaviors, there was this tiny little part of me that knew this was not who I was. But I had no idea how to find her, how to find the true self that I was. Fast forward, with a lot of work over the years and no psychedelics, I soon I learned a process of fire yoga, or a way of transforming the wounded parts of myself. I didn't know that I was doing that, but I was doing that. till at one point I woke up and my world was pretty okay. It was pretty bright. Somewhere along the way, I decided I was going to become a therapist so I could help other people do this kind of thing. And that's when I went back to school, got my master's, set up a practice, and continued to take many, many, many trainings after that. Somatic Experiencing, EMDR, EFT, art and expressive work. So I've done a lot of training since then. Okay, that's good. So my inquiry or query to all of us is, what if trauma was the soul's chosen path to liberate ourselves from the imprisonment of the ego's perceived powerlessness, emptiness, and victimization? And what if there was a higher purpose to trauma? So I want to read this quote from a client who realized this after his first MDMA journey, working with his own CPTSD. And this is what he says: "Something larger than my life, my soul, is down on its knees, washing my feet with admiration, saluting my journey. My soul is washing my feet as an expression of honoring the courage it takes to be human, to be born and to forget that oneness, and then to struggle back toward it." So let's look at what is CPTSD, and we're going to do this really quickly. I took a minute and I thought maybe I should have a more like intellectual, theoretical explanation for you guys. So I went into Wikipedia and I got some basic facts about it. The key piece I want to bring to mind right now is that it's distinguishing it from other dissociative disorders. The main distinction being that it distorts a person's core identity, especially when prolonged trauma occurs during childhood development. And prior to this, it says it's the result of repetitive, prolonged trauma involving sustained abuse or abandonment by a caregiver or other interpersonal relationships with an uneven power dynamic. Complex PTSD relates to the trauma model of mental disorders and is associated with sexual, emotional, or physical abuse or neglect in childhood. Doesn't matter that we were more abused than neglected. The fact is that abuse equals neglect. And even if there was no abuse in childhood, if we were not emotionally witnessed, seen, heard, and allowed to express all of the range of who we were, on some level, we are going to feel traumatized. It basically gets translated by the child, "I'm not loved." So complex PTSD is a complex series of events of traumatization while the child is developing. And each of us as a child has to go through very specific stages to learn how to master certain skills to live well in the world. I'll run through these just quickly, and you may want to track for yourself. Is it safe for me to exist in the world? I mean, do I feel like I belong? That's what that means. Is it safe to have needs? Is it safe to act on my needs and ask for what I want? So there's a difference between having needs and being able to ask for those needs to be met. Some of those are some of the core places. Even if we can ask for those needs to be met, is it safe to ask for support and allow myself to be supported? That's a whole other range of learning. If we can do that, is it safe to say, no, I don't want this? I worked with a woman for a while who was processing one of her journeys, and she was saying that her big revelation was that she got to not like something. She got to say, no, I don't want that. That was a huge revelation for her that she was working through. And is it safe to trust my inner guidance? So trauma has an intelligence. If we are recycling certain episodes, certain feelings that are uncomfortable, if we are recycling certain behaviors that get us into trouble, there's actually an intelligence behind us. It's the way that the system is saying, no, you're not going to the next step until you've mastered this. So it keeps drawing us back to the place that has not been mastered and has not been healed. So if something keeps coming up, it's our invitation to go back and say, okay, what is my psyche trying to get me to learn here before I can take the next step? The key is that we don't want to start pathologizing it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the big step, the big leap. We want to use it as a catalyst to take us into the true self, which is an incredible place to live from. And if we don't do that, if we pathologize it and then try to fix our ego, we miss that opportunity. Does everybody get that? All right, so this is the chart. This is the chart that I trained with for many years through integrated body psychotherapy. And I think this is masterful, genius way of describing what actually happens in a trauma cycle. The outer circle here, the false selves, those are the defenses that we've built up to protect us from the pain of stuff that happens to us in childhood. The blue spot here is the true self, and that's what was destroyed, so to speak, not really destroyed, but covered over by this whole massive inner circle. So this whole massive inner part here is actually the wounded parts of the self. There are only two ways that we can be wounded. We're wounded either by being abandoned, which means not necessarily physically, but which means not okay to be who we are, not okay to have our feelings, not okay to have our needs met, when we're not seen and witnessed. Invaded means we are hurt or we abused in some way, our boundaries are disrespected. So those are the only two things that we need to worry about. What we do and how we try to correct that, the psyche's brilliant way of getting us through childhood until we can get to the place as an adult where we can actually return to the true self, because that we can do once we're an adult. But the psyche's way of protecting us until that point is then to develop these three core major defense systems. So I want to see if we can kind of get this, and I'm going to invite you to maybe work it yourself right now, just for a moment. So imagine you have a feeling, whatever feeling, doesn't matter what it is, and it's ignored. Who's experienced that? Ever? Only a few? You feel something, and it's not seen, it's not witnessed, it's not reflected, it's not responded to. Usually when that happens as a child, the child disappears that feeling. So what happens is that nothing takes its place. And we're left with an empty hole. Where did the feeling go? I don't know. But it's not there anymore. And in its place is emptiness. So in the brilliance of the way the psyche works, the psyche says, well, I don't matter. I don't exist. It doesn't matter. And it builds a construct which we're now calling the never enough. And what that construct does is it looks outside the self to get its needs met. Why? Because it's empty. It doesn't have a self to fill itself up, so it reaches outward to get everything that it can get. Hence, addictions, focusing on other people for love. Got to get that love. I don't love myself. Got to get it from so-and-so. It focuses on success. It focuses on more money. And we're driven to pull things in from the outside to fill up that hole. Now imagine that we're playing, we're having a good time, and somebody says, shut up, or get out of here, or slaps us across the face. And we're stunned and we don't know what to do. A little kid, and so we're sitting in the room or playing in the room, and it's like all of our joy just got smacked out of us, and we feel completely powerless to do anything about it. We start to feel out of control. So when there's an invasive injury, the underlying feeling is powerlessness. We develop a style of personality style that we're calling the controller for now, because that controller puts up a rigid boundary to keep others out and keep feelings in. Key thing about both of these styles is this. If we have rigid boundaries, we find safety in being alone. So remember safety, we're working with safety. We have to find safety somewhere. So controller finds safety in being alone. Then at least I'm alone. I can avoid all the horrible things that might happen to me, right? How many people relate to that? A lot of people. All right. What does never enough do for safety? Attaches to people, places, and things. Attaches, if I'm just with somebody, if that person just loved me and I can get close to them, whew, my world's okay. So what happens if we have an equal emptiness and powerlessness thing going on? What do we do then? Because we're not safe alone and we're not safe with people, so what do we do? Anybody want to guess? Drugs! Have both, I don't matter, I don't exist, I'm out of control, and I'm powerless. So we have all of that going on. There's no safety anywhere in the physical world. Does anybody relate to that? We are ingeniously set up to deal with that by rising up out of our body and into our head. And that's called dissociation. So there's a spectrum of dissociation, of course. Some of us are extreme with severe dissociative disorders, but most of us normal people walk around quite dissociated as well. We just call that being smart and being mental. And we know how to fix our life. How many here think they can fix their life? And we know how to prepare. How many people here are prepared for the inevitable? So we figured it out. How many people figured out their life? I did. I thought I figured it out. The key about this model, it's so ingenious, is that when it doesn't work, when thinking doesn't work, when being alone doesn't work, when attaching to people don't work, what happens? We fall back into the center. We feel the pain of that original pain. Maybe just for a minute, because that's all we can stand, right? What about if we have been alone and all of a sudden our friends say, hey, come on out, join me, we're going out to a party tonight, and we're going, oh, can't do that. What happens? We fall back into the pain, right? So what we don't understand is that our journey is to go here. But what do we do when we're back in that pain? What do we do typically? We flip back out here. Go back into our style, our defense mechanisms. Try to get it fixed. Get back alone. I got to get back alone. Or I got to grab after that same person who's not going to come with me anyway. What do? That's what we do. And do you see how we keep cycling around the same thing over and over and over and over again? So, what are we supposed to do? What? Psychedelics! That's a really interesting one, because we can do psychedelics when we're in that place. And if we're not doing it consciously and intentionally, then what are we doing? Drugs. We're using it to further dissociate from the issue at hand. Okay, so you all are going to be smart drug users. Okay, so because what we have to do, our job, is to get here. All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, so our job is to get here. I don't know how much time we have. I want to tell a great story about, no, I'm not going to tell it now. I'm going to wait, see how much time we have. But so mainly, get this. The true self has a corresponding aspect to the false identity over here. So what we're really after when we put those rigid boundaries around ourselves, what we're really after is we're after self-authority, strength, and vulnerability, as well as the ability to discern. So that's what we're really looking for, so that we can feel solid in our capacity to be ourself in a strong way. That's the true boundary. That's the true self corresponding to the rigid boundary, which feels powerless inside. Okay, everybody with me? All right, let's look over here. So what's the true self correspondent to this emptiness? This is an interesting one. It's kind of paradoxical, but the true self aspect of enough has to begin with being enough with what is. So where we are right now in this present moment, no matter what it is that we're feeling, even if the feeling is empty, we have to learn to start filling up with that feeling. Because if we really look underneath and we experience what emptiness feels like, there's a quality to it. And once we start attending to that quality, it becomes full of ourself. And that's the beauty of staying, instead of running back to the outside, of staying here long enough to get to the center of the true self. Okay, this is not going to happen overnight, but this is the journey, guys. So let's look up here at the mentalizer. I love this one. I love it. If we stop thinking long enough and we start figuring our life out long enough, then what happens? We begin to come back down in to the body and we connect with the heart. And believe it or not, the heart already knows. The heart is the true self, and it has the answers. And it has the answers right now in this moment. Okay, it doesn't have to be figured out, and it can't be figured out. It has the answers right now in this moment. That is the beauty of allowing ourselves to come down out of the head, into the body, and into the heart. Okay, so what is the true self? Gotta read this. So a client of mine, she also did some work with MDMA, and we're working together. And a couple of months later, she's just like flying high. I mean, she's totally flying high. And I said to her, so, you know, this place that you're at now, this thing that you're just flying high around, what is this? She said, oh, it's my true self. And I said, okay, well, what is your true self? Because I wanted to hear it from somebody who actually got there. This is what she said. I'm aware of being a person in the world, but empty of old identity and desires. I have no expectations for self and others. I'm lighter. The only thing that is real is to be love. That's my real self. Anything else feels crappy. I don't feel darkness. I'm the harp and God is playing me. My true self is all loving and all kind. So when we're flying out there, out in cosmic space, having a joyful place, you know, maybe that's an aspect of our true self, right? I like to think that it is. But what happens when we come back? What happens when the journey ends and we're back in this body? What do we do then? So I like to think, so I wrote this as what is the true self, is an embodied self as intact and separate, yet unified and one with everything. It is not a transcendental idea. We're not floating out in space. We are in human bodies. And the trick is that we want to bring that awesome experience that we just had back down here into the body level and actually walk and talk and live from that place. That's what I saw on the subway 30 years ago. And I knew that that was my job. That's what I had to do. And it took me decades, but I'm pretty close to being there, I would say. I have my moments, but I'm more there than ever. So basically, all of these things, I don't need to go through all of them. I just want us to say that the ego blocks us. Those defenses block us from knowing this. So if we can use our journeys to begin dissolving that ego space so we can step into the true self in a smart way, we are good. All right, let me explain something. Children, you know how children are so spontaneous and having an awesome time. Okay, so children have an internal guidance system. You have an internal guidance system. I have an internal guidance system. What does it consist of? It consists of basic urges, impulses, instincts. When we have been hurt, abandoned, or abused in any manner, we lose touch with those instincts. We get confused. We don't know what they are. And our job is to begin to learn to trust them again and follow them again. The other thing that the true self has, it has an internal mechanism of loving and an internal mechanism of protection. And it also has interrelationships, the ability to relate to others. That is the true self. I'm going to come back to this internal guidance system in a minute because it's crucial. Everybody that I worked with has an impaired internal guidance system. IGS, that's a good word. IGS, internal guidance system. All right. I want us to run down a few of these things because I want us to really get what the difference is between the true self and the impaired self. So we're not going to go through this whole thing. We don't have time. But I want you to know that these places inside of you are not your true self. So once we begin to recognize that, that's the beginning process of separating ourselves out from who we're not so we can live in who we are. The inability to access feelings and needs. The If we can't access our feelings and needs, then we do not have an internal guidance system. If we don't know that we're feeling something, then we are not going to be able to go towards it. If we don't know we like something, we're not going to be able to go towards it. If we don't know we don't like it, we're not going to be able to go away from it, right? And then we end up in situations that do not feel good, but now we're stuck. How many people are in a marriage they can't get out of? How many people married somebody because they thought they should? Okay, rather than listening. Believe me, I know, okay? Listening. My feelings told me, no, no, no. But I didn't listen because my mentalizer knew better. Then you try years later to get out of it and you go, I'm scared. I can't get out of this thing because I don't trust myself. No, you don't trust yourself because it's not yourself that you don't trust. It's the ego you don't trust. And you should not trust the ego. That's correct. But once you begin touching into this internal navigation system inside, you will begin to trust yourself, I promise, because it never fails us. Our feelings are amazing guidance. We feel a diminishing of one's true place in the world. I don't matter. I don't belong. Of course. How can you belong or matter if you don't have your feelings and needs? Inability to have a voice, be seen and heard, to express oneself in intimate relationships. How can you express yourself in an intimate relationship if you don't know what's in there to express? I want to explain something about trauma. The reason why we don't know what's in here to express, hypervigilance. So if somebody's coming at us as a child, what do we learn to do? We learn to focus intently outward to protect ourselves, to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? So once we're focused externally, we've lost that internal place. We could be feeling joyful and happy and having a great time, and then all of a sudden, we better check out what's happening out there. We lose touch with what's going on in here. So a big piece of the recovery process is learning that it's safe to know what's going on inside. We have to attend to what's going on inside. Let me say a little bit about the rage and terror stored in the nervous system, because this is a very, very crucial piece. A lot of people who are going through trauma recovery through psychedelic use will have somatic or body symptoms. And those symptoms can be shaking, heat, just weird things that feel uncomfortable. Okay, it's very important to understand that that is the body in the process of healing itself. Because what happens in a traumatic situation is that the body wants to eat the fight-flight response. The body either wants to fight or it wants to flee. And if it can't do either, which it can't do when we're children, so what it does is it freezes. And when the body freezes, that impulse to fight and flee is stored in the nervous system. And that was what creates a lot of the PTSD symptoms later on in life, is that the stored rage, fight impulses, stored flee impulses. In the animal kingdom, what happens when that happens, when an animal, a prey, is being predatored, okay, what happens is that animal will then freeze and then drop to the ground. So it sort of goes numb and feigns sleeping, and the predator often will not try to devour an already dead animal. So it's a protection device, and the predator will then leave or go away. For us, we have a cognitive override, which we talk about is actually part of that is the DMN. The default mode network. It actually overrides that wisdom of the body that we have as animals, as an animal body, to protect ourselves. So if we start going through rage responses and terror responses, that's normal. So we want to know how to work with those responses, both somatically and also emotionally. Okay, so the healing imperative. I want us to take a break for a second and just turn to somebody who's next to you and share what's happening. Just what's happening. What are you aware of right now? Are you aware of any instincts, urges, impulses going on, feelings, sensations? Okay, let's pick up here. I kind of want to take a temperature read. I wonder how you guys are doing with this. I mean, is it instructional? Are you learning something? Is it overwhelming? Should we keep going? Whoa, okay. Healing imperative. Cognitive psychoeducation. You're not your impaired self. I don't know how I can say how important it is. You guys are right on. You're here. You're learning it. But if we don't know the difference between our true self and our false selves, we can't get anywhere. So this process of the head, the mind, understanding the difference between the true self, what we're after, love, compassion, forgiveness, joy, that's real, not a fantasy place. And we mistake our true self for like our scared little stay in my hole place or my grasping place. We're kind of going to be in trouble. We're going to keep looping. So cognitive psychoeducation, you're doing it. Then we want to know what our true self is. Okay, you have experienced the true self. This is where I feel like if you do not have any concept of the self, like I didn't, until I got on the subway and I was like graced with joy, I wouldn't have not known what to do, and I wouldn't have had an impulse or that motivation to get there myself because I experienced it. So I feel like since psychedelics are the major way that we can get an experience of true self if we don't get it otherwise. So I know some of you in here are really serious meditators. You've had transcendental experiences. Maybe you don't need psychedelics. But if you're one of those real hard, rigid guys, you do. Okay, and then we talked about distinguishing the difference. Okay, so what's really fascinating about this is that the false self, as we saw, is actually an idea that we've constructed in the mind. It's not real. Yet we can live it as if it's real. So getting that difference, another word for true self would be ground of being. So I can just give a little bit of it, an example of how that played havoc in my life, is that when I was in my mentalizer function, I had all of these creative ideas that were constantly jerking me around. And I would run after every single one of them because they were all exciting. I could see the whole vision of the great creative thing that I had constructed in my mind. Some people are nodding. If you're a creative type, you know. And then I would try going down the path, and it would all fall apart. It could not sustain itself. Why? It wasn't in my ground of being. So it was false. It was a false concept. And when I did my first MDMA journey, I don't even like to call it a journey, it's not a journey. When I did my first MDMA experience, I felt what it was like to be grounded in my ground of being for the very first time in my life. When I did my third MDMA journey, I knew what it felt like to be in my parasympathetic nervous system. I had never experienced that before. I couldn't experience it because my mother was not ever there to nurture me. We can't sink into our parasympathetic, calm, relaxed, nourished, nurtured place without a mother to hold us there. So having that experience of being in my body open in a relaxed, calm, nurturing way, I said to my sitter friend, I said, wow, I said, this is what it's like to just hang out. Being the good sitter that she was, she went, wow, I never hung out with people before. That was a revelation. That was true. All of those ideas in my head went away. As a matter of fact, after that experience, I never had another creative idea in my head again. It was great. But I did have urges, instincts, and impulses that came from my true self. What did I do? I picked up the phone and I called Helen. And I said, I would like to do a presentation. And Helen said, yes. And it stuck. That's the difference. Ground of being versus mental spinning. One's a concept, one's true. Okay, so some of the skills that we need to learn. There's a difference between the trauma vortex. That's when we're spinning, we've been triggered, we're spinning around, we feel overwhelmed, we're having a meltdown, we're freaking out, whatever word you want to use. And the healing vortex. The healing vortex is when we give that freaked out child place something it did not get from childhood. So somehow we're able to connect the trigger to the missing link. So when we're overwhelmed and in trauma and freaking out, there is a reason. And if we are skilled enough to discover what that reason is, we can use that missing link from childhood to get us back to center, to get us back grounded. That's the beginning of reparenting, and that comes from, reparenting. That comes from some investigative work where we connect our present day freak out place, overwhelmed place, to an earlier childhood wound. So that's a very systematic process. And by the way, since I'm talking about this now, I have a free download on my homepage that I frantically put together this morning and got it to actually work. And you can get, if you want to go there, you can download, not yet, the downloads will actually be there next week. But you can get all of the worksheets on how to do a bunch of these processes that we're talking about from my website if you want that. Shrinking the inner critic. I don't know how many of you, I certainly do this, confuse my critic with myself. That little voice that says, you're a piece of, I believe it. Don't you believe it most of the time? Okay, so part of our work is to disidentify from that voice and begin to realize that's not who we are. Whenever it's negative, and I remember going through a few years of actually recognizing and realizing that, wait a minute, my true self is always loving. If it's not a loving thought, then it's not true. It's blanket wisdom. If it's not a loving thought, it's not true. We need to engage in reparenting of the traumatized parts of ourselves because we can do that. Now, there's a window of neuroplasticity when we are doing psychedelic work. For example, we know that we want to do ibogaine for getting off of heroin addiction. We know that there is a period of 3 to 6 months after that in which the brain is very neuroplastic. And that is the ideal time to begin making these changes in the brain and changing this stuff, these messages. I don't have the research right now at this point in time in terms of some of the other psychedelics, So maybe somebody else here in the audience does. I don't know exactly how long we have after MDMA, how long we have after LSD, how long we have after psilocybin to make those changes. But what I do know is that during the journey, we have that time. And so if we come to the journey with that intention of doing this kind of healing intentionally, we can use that time of neuroplasticity to really begin changing our relationship to our wounded parts. Grieving our losses, we have to grieve. I am not a believer in staying stuck there. So if you remember that big circle chart, our idea is to get from the outside through the pain, grieve the losses, and get as fast as we can into the true self. And that's the journey. So I'm not one to, let's not like belabor the grieving part, but certainly if it's true grieving, we want to let it up and let it continue until it's completed its natural rhythms. Being vulnerable, learning how to be vulnerable as an adult versus a needy child. An important distinction. So as children, as needy, traumatized children, we start grabbing and crying and throwing temper tantrums. I've been there. Have you been there when you felt that as an adult? Right? Today? That's not the place to engage in a relationship from. That is the place to do your healing and engage with your therapist, but it's not the best place to do intimate relationship from. So what we have to learn is there is a distinction between that needy, grabby, tantrumy, wounded part which needs attention. That's when we go in and we do our reparenting, and we start giving that inner child part the stuff that he or she didn't get when we were children. And at the same time, we have to learn how to be vulnerable and intimate with our close partners. So the distinction being is, I'm feeling a lot of love right now towards you, and I'm scared. That's an adult way of dealing with the fear that might be emerging in an intimate relationship in the present as an adult versus, get out of here. That's not exactly, that is the child. So it's not bad that we do that. I've done that many times, but we just want to at some point recognize it and learn that that's not really where we want to go. We want to go back into the true self. All right. And of course, basic self-soothing and protection skills is something that we need to learn how to do, which is what we're just talking about. How do we soothe ourselves when we're freaking out? How do we protect ourselves from people, places, and things that aren't good for us? We have to have the wisdom. I had a client I worked with for a while, and she was always talking about how difficult it was and how scared she was to be where she was, where she lived. And one day I said to her, have you ever thought about moving? So she did. She moved. And it worked. So that's protection. She really did. And I'm not making fun because I've done this. Remember, I lived in that loft. I painted the walls black and I lived in a plastic tarp with a space heater. Nobody said to me, have you ever thought of ... I mean, I couldn't figure the way out of it. So I have the most compassion for people who get stuck in those kinds of ruts. And I had to learn. So did she. Okay, so. Yeah, then I guess finally, the key piece here is the true self doesn't plan its way. The true self does not know the future. It does not plan its way to the future. The true self lives in the moment and in touch with its urges, impulses, feelings, and instincts. The wisdom comes in and it knows what the next move is. That's it, period. If your mind starts co-opting that process and starts telling you, and then this, and then this, and then this, you have just risen up into mentalizer and you are going to be sunk. Because it's not going to happen. Okay. Okay, we get to do the juicy part now about the default mode network, which is like the hypey word that we're all learning about right now. And believe me, I'm no expert in this, but I just want to put it together a little bit with what we've been talking about trauma. So if trauma distorts a person's core identity, especially when prolonged trauma occurs during childhood, and if the default mode network orchestrates the functions that are described as identity, if the default mode network is a global network of interconnectedness so that all of our function is being impacted by the identity created by the trauma. Think about that. That's a massive creation our brain just performed on our identity. And there are not very many things that can intercept this default mode. Psychedelics is one of them. Let's use it to that end. I want to pose another idea that we might want to think about here. So when we have shock trauma, it's more or less a one-time event. And then we go through the process of healing from it, again, somatically, because it is a nervous system healing that has to occur. But think about if it's happening recurringly during childhood and our identity is forming around it. That's what's so, the ingeniousness of the default mode is then taking these trauma, these experiences are supposed to be transitory. They're supposed to be transitory. One-time events that then get discharged by the reptilian brain, and it actually co-opts it and makes it part of the identity. That's what we're dealing with here with the default mode. So I don't need to rehash, but we can use psychedelics to really bring us into the state of neuroplasticity where we can begin to do some deep healing around that place. All right, we get to the tools and the processes. Okay, so we need to work on 3 levels: cognitive, emotional, and somatic. That goes without saying, but I wanted to bring that up. So, because when we're growing up as children, we get implanted with a whole bunch of belief systems that are not true. We just went through that. None of those false selves beliefs are true. We need to start becoming aware of them, and we need to start reframing them, retraining our mind to think truth. Emotional, all those fears, rage, grief, all the feelings that are associated, vulnerability, that neediness from childhood. We need to recognize that as not self, but we need to honor it as brokenness within us and use those places for our healing. This is never about pathologizing. It's about this catalyst that we can use our belief systems, our emotional and our somatic constriction for our own behalf to catalyze us to move forward towards the true self. Oh, so that whole slide isn't there. Stephen Porges has a beautiful quote that says the imperative for humans is to be connected to other humans. And we've already seen that when we're traumatized, we don't have that capacity very well down. So our beginning work is to start working with our inner and outer safety resources. And that's the bottom line foundational work that we all need to start doing. And that is recognizing what brings me to safety internally. How can I connect to external people in a safe fashion? The therapist relationship can start to heal those pathways through the connection with the therapist. And then there's the environment, and that's the setting and the set and setting that we need to really pay attention to. That setting has got to be healing. It has to be feel good and safe. When you're going on a journey, you're not going to do it at a club. So I know a lot of us have. Hang my head in shame. But not for the purpose of healing. So we want to pay attention to what we put in that space. If you've got cluttered, ugly stuff around that just reminds you of your life being a mess, don't do your journey there. I really like to think of, where do I want to go? What's the purpose of the journey? The purpose of the journey is to take me forward into more love. And so that's where the intention comes in, but create the space to hold that for you. Create the person to be there who's going to be there with you to hold that for you. And the therapist becomes the witness. The therapist becomes, I'm saying therapist, but guide. Well, I'm a therapist, so I'm saying therapist because the therapist has the professional skills to actually witness you and to see you. Where a normal person might not. A regular, I don't mean normal, but a regular person may not have those skills because they're going to bring it back to themselves. Unless we're trained to reflect. We're trained to put ourselves aside and to reflect you to you. And when you're healing from trauma, that's what you need most, is to be seen unconditionally and accepted unconditionally where you are, because that's what we did not get when we were children. Okay, I think we've done a lot of this. Let me just see. So some of the key skills, I'm just going to run through some of these key pieces. Besides the safety, knowing the qualities of the true self, we also want to know the qualities of the false self, and we want to learn the skill of disidentifying ourselves from that, separating ourselves from the false selves. That was a skill I actually spent many years in training to learn how to do. I learned how to disidentify, and we called it that. Countering the inner critic and false beliefs. Yeah, we have those thoughts, but we're not going to go run our lives by them. We did reparenting, embodying healing messages, and working with triggers. I think that's enough. Just know that there is a science, a psychological science to working with triggers. There is a process. We're triggered. That's step number one. We recognize that we're triggered. That's step number two. We start asking ourselves, what does that remind us about our childhood? That's step number three. We see if we can connect the dots, and then we look at, what did that child not get back then that he or she needed? And we give that to the child. That's step number four. And then we visit and we come back and we start feeling what that feels like in our body. So the body is included in all of this. Whoa. Guess it's time to go. Okay, I want to talk about the stages of recovery from developmental trauma and how we fit the entheogens in. These are the two pieces, and then we're done. Stages of recovery. First stage is going to be no recovery. First stage is unconscious. We are acting out our addictions and our defenses, as I was for age 11 to age 27. Then something wakes us up. We may be able to get into the second stage. The second stage is victim. Victim is the stage in which we feel like, why did this happen to me? My life stinks. This addiction stinks. I want out of it. These defenses and behaviors stink. I'm a victim of all of this. My life is miserable and I want out. So we might call that the victim stage. That's actually not a bad stage to be in. At some point, there might be another awakening, and then we get curious. Wow, what can we do with this? Well, maybe there's a way out of this. Maybe we go to the Amazon and we do some ayahuasca with the shaman, or we go to Mexico and do ibogaine with the shaman, or we go to the nearest DMT thing and we do that. But we're looking. We follow a spiritual path. So in my case, I actively started looking for a spiritual training. And I found one that I stayed in for 15 years and taught me the skills of clearing the wounded parts and healing the wounded parts in a very, very spiritual way. there's a point at which we begin to get that, whoa, I'm responsible for what's happening to me. This was a very interesting shift in my life. And it took a few years for me to really get it down. That stuff wasn't happening to me, that I was actually creating it. Now, that does not mean that when I was a little helpless kid and I didn't get enough love, that didn't mean that she should have, that she wasn't creating it. But what I was doing with it as an adult in the present was continuing that dynamic, and I was continuing to create it. So this is a very, very important stage. And the stage of responsibility is what then throws us back into looking for and actually beginning the hard work of working on ourselves. So this is the stage, when we enter into the healing stage, this is where we can really use our psychedelic journey. And in a minute, I'm going to give you some ideas of how that you can work with the entheogens to actually work yourself through this healing stage. And simultaneously, in there, at some point, the stage of living your true self starts to happen. And I want to tell a little bit interesting story about how I happened to begin to step into that place, because I had been working on myself really, really hard for many years, and I was a really miserable, serious person. And I thought that's who I was. And for some reason, I decided I was sort of looking for things to do, and there was like a laughter yoga workshop in my area, and I decided, well, I'll become a laughter yoga facilitator. And so I went to this workshop, and I spent 2 days being silly and laughing ridiculously and feeling completely stupid and completely out of sorts. But what I realize now is what was happening was I was embracing and incorporating an aspect of my true self that had been exiled or that had put aside because I didn't know up to that point how to play. So as we're going through this healing, we can start noticing with the urges and the instincts and the impulses, what is our true self calling us to? And don't let the mental mind stop us from following those urges, because it will try to say, you can't go down that road. That's silly. You have to be a serious expert of some sort. You're not allowed to be vulnerable and silly. You can't do that. So you want to understand that voice, again, is preventing us from allowing the new true self places to come into our life. And it feels uncomfortable because it's not familiar. Okay, so good. All right, so how to work with entheogens? Well, obviously, we all know this. We need to have strong intentions for healing. And I would suggest definitely intentions that are going to activate the true self. So you're looking for intentions like, I want to love more. I want to have access to my playful part. I want to feel more alive and juicy. I want to access more sexuality in my life. Yes, sexual is true self. True self does live in the body. And also intentions for healing. Where are the shame parts that I'm feeling? I want to go into, during this journey, I want to go back into a shame part, an experience that I have shame around. I don't want to experience it differently. I want to experience from the standpoint of my true self. So with that intention, once those neural pathways are opened up, we can literally step into that place in a whole new way from the viewpoint of the true self. And of course, as we talked about, we can blast through barriers and we can break ourselves open, especially if we have a rigid container. We can reset our whole personality system can be reset. That happened to me when I was doing ayahuasca. I literally had a reset. And the shaman actually told me that my whole prior life had been completely cleared out. get relief from suffering, purification from addiction, as I already said, allowing and following true self, choosing to work on a specific quality or aspect. Okay, so we went through that. Here's an example from another client of mine who did a session. She says, my defense layers are softer. I can see shadows of pre-existing layers that I may have worn at earlier stages of my life. I had a physical healing in my jaw area. It usually requires several cranial sessions to get that relief. I expressed about my limitations. There were a couple of pieces that were really new. And as those were spoken, the pain in my jaw melted. I was aware that when I spoke, those layers were clearing simultaneously. Remember, we talked about never enough. Here's another quote from a client. I experienced a radical shift in perception. I could experience what it is like to feel like I am enough. She went into that session with a very powerful intention along those lines. That's what she was working on. She knew that she was grappling with this never enough place, that she could never be enough for herself or her internal father, and she went in specifically to work on that. And that my energy is precious. The journey opened the door to release and heal and move forward in my life. I could get out of the way and let the life force of joy run through me. I could see that my body, the earth, the womb, all hold a deep connection to spirit. And this is alive on this planet. I could take refuge in it and relax right here in this moment and let the rest go. So if nothing else, you can request an experience of being in this moment totally and start practicing that. All right, so here's some more specific examples of things that we can do. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. So just to make this more intentional, viewing your defenses, addictions, and wounded parts from the viewpoint of the true self. Remember that big chart with the outer and then the pain and then the true self in the center? We can, when we're doing psychedelics, we can actually have the capacity to skip over that wound and go right into the center of the true self. And then we can look outward from that place. We see the wounded parts and we work with them from there. We see the defenses and we work with them from there. Initiating the process of removal of body armor. I want to tell another story about a client, we'll call him Max, and he specifically came to me, had done 30 years of psychodynamic work. He knew that he had a defense structure, which he called the wall. It was a protection from abusive parents and bullying when he was a kid. He knew it was there. He could not dissolve it. He could not get rid of it. He did breath work. He did somatic work. He did talk therapy. And so when he came to me, he had done about 3 months of psilocybin and MDMA. And as we worked, he let me know, he told me that what actually happened during those sessions is that that wall that he had been living with all those years just began to dissolve, the body armor. And he said that he actually began to feel, for the first time, happy, like a real sense of happiness. That is by the release, the beginning of the initiation of the release of the body armor. All right, the other thing that we can do is we can actually visit parts of the self that we didn't know that we had. We can ask to see parts of true self that we didn't know was there before. Such as love, compassion, wisdom, creative flow, joy. One person said to me, personal sense of me having a real identity that was not stained, and it actually had angelic qualities. We can step into a clean, purified self without addiction. We can work through numbness and freeze responses by allowing the body to unwind stored trauma. We can do that without psychedelics, but on entheogens, on specific substances, that becomes very pronounced and very profound. And if you're working with a sitter who doesn't understand that process, it could be a little, I want to say dangerous, but it'll just stop the process, because the body has a healing wisdom and it knows how to unwind itself. The sitter, the therapist has to be trained to allow that process to happen and not interfere with it. Okay, with exiled parts of self, as we talked about, joy, sexuality, beauty, younger parts. Oh, in one session, I was so excited. I found my little girl who likes to strut her stuff. Healing of birth trauma. One thing to work with, this is a wonderful technique when you're reparenting, is to really own those truth statements. So I am strong. I am innocent. I am vulnerable. I am worthy. Those are statements that we can begin to really work with in our sessions, in our journeys. We can claim them and own them and be them in a way that we've never been before. You can look in the mirror like on mushrooms and you can see yourself as beautiful, right? You may never, ever have seen yourself as beautiful before. Making different choices. And of course, spiritual experiences. I think that's it. All right. I do have some workshops coming up. Saturday, June 30th, I'm doing a 4-hour workshop where we'll go into greater depth with this. Limited number of people, not open. So and I do intend to do a number of workshops over the next year, workshops that if you're interested. Did we pass those sign-up sheets around? Okay, great. So, next Sunday. Is it next Sunday, Helen? So I will be doing a healing from developmental trauma series through, So it's one a month, pretty much. I'm skipping July and December, but the first one is Sunday, June 24th, and that's at NXT, right? Okay, so that's on the Meetup list. Okay. All right, generally speaking, entheogens can rewire neural pathways, heal old wounds, shift perceptions, expand self-identity, interrupt old patterns, bring more joy, purify, show us new directions, help us find new meaning, help us forgive, bring greater truth, dissolve body armor, but they will not install new thoughts and behaviors. They won't install it. You have to install it. Teach us new skills, give us stronger boundaries. This is all the work that we have to do. Improve our communication and help us feel safe. Unless somebody else disagrees, I'm fine. I'm open. I'm open to whatever. I haven't experienced everything. All right. Your true self is waiting for you. But you have to do the work. All right, this is one of those great creative ideas I had. I got to put her somewhere. All right, thank you, everybody. Questions? Can you still hear me? Okay, thank you all for staying through this whole thing. I'm really impressed. All right, so I can't see very well, but does anybody have a question about anything? Okay, Helen, why don't you? Yeah, I will be happy to. Yes, the question was I saying that, yes, psychotherapy can do that, but really any number of things, psychospiritual work, spiritual programs, I mean, anything that we're into that in our ordinary life that we need to learn, we learn to practice using the new thoughts and the behaviors. Right, we need to teach ourselves the new skills, give ourselves stronger back. We need to practice this stuff. We can't just get it on a journey. You have to go out into the world and do it. So, yeah, so what's the question is, what is addiction in the whole idea of the false self? Well, addiction is dissociation. That's how I see it. So it's the way we deal and cope with feelings that we can't deal and cope with otherwise. And it's not a negative thing for the time that it's going on. It's something that we need. We put it into place because it nourishes us on some level. It's better than living in that crazy pain. But, at that stage where we start to wake up, we realize it's really not feeding us. And so we need to walk ourselves out of the addiction and into the true self so that we can really be fed. But it's a good temporary stop along the way. That's it. Thank you. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so, gosh, I didn't think anybody was going to ask me that question. I don't know if I have the answer. No, I do. If we're coming from a place internally where we're filling a hole by giving to somebody else, it's caretaking. Actually, I don't know which is which. Doesn't matter. It's the one you don't want to be doing. If you are filled with love and you're giving because the love is flowing out of you, that's the caring you want to be doing. And so it's a body-felt experience. So when you're doing it out of a hole inside, out of feeling empty inside to get some need met and you get recognized, get somebody to love you back, that you don't want to be doing. I really don't remember which one is which. Thank you all for coming. I'm just so excited.
All right, thank you so much to Jane, and thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. Jane has some printed materials in the back below the exit sign across from the blue recycle bin. There's some postcards with her info.
Yeah, actually, I do have my cards right there on the shelf there by the door if you want to get a hold of me. And also Elizabeth Price, colleague of mine, has also cards. So the two of us can be available.
Also, there's a list down here. You can put your email address on there. She can contact you. We do have 50 chairs that we have to put away under this stage over here. So if you have a few minutes to hang out, that would be fantastic. Thanks a lot, everyone. We have a lot of events here at the Paris, and check out our two groups. We have a lot of awesome content coming out in the next 2 months. And obviously, we have the big conferences coming with the celebrities of the psychedelic world with Stamets and with McKenna. So save the date on 9/20 and 10/27. Thanks a lot, everyone.